please.
Director LaHue,
Here?
Vice President Lather,
Here.
Director Jaffe,
He was just here a second ago.
He needs to unmute himself.
I'm unmuted now.
Okay, he's here.
Here.
Director Christensen,
Here.
and President Daniels.
I'm here too.
Great.
A couple of announcements before we get started with our agenda. Closed session item number 2 is removed from the agenda, and we will not be discussing it with this meeting. So therefore, there'll be no
Item number 2.
8.2. Closed session
Oh.
item 8.2.
Okay.
So we will not have any public comment on that either. Then.
Okay.
I don't know whether all you noticed, but Becky has asked for consent items 4, 5, 4, 6, and 4, 7 for discussion. Notice that the
Fine.
agenda says it is requested that public members provide an explanation with request to remove agenda items, as this helps the board determine if items should remain on consent or be pulled for discussion. So, that being the case, item number 2 is the public hearing, which we have none of. So we go to item number 3, where board members can mention the items, the consent items they wish to be removed from that agenda. So, Director LaHue, anything to remove?
Yes, I would like, I just had a quick question, but it's on 4.7. And then I also would request that the ones that Ms. Steinbruner requested also be removed.
Okay, that's 4, 5, 4, 6, 4, 7. Vice President Lather? Michelle? I can't hear you. Your mouth is moving.
My mouth is moving, but no words are coming out. On the production reports.
That's
So that-
already full.
Is that already pulled? Okay.
That's already full. Anything else?
I'd just like to note on 4.9, I don't want to pull it. I just wanted to compliment Tracy Hart for her efforts on getting that letter going and submitted. So it's just a call out for Tracy.
Yep, I agree. By the way, our attorney has told us that we can comment on consent items without having to pull them. So if you want
Exactly. I remember
to
that
say
from the
something
last
about
meeting.
it, you can just mention it. Okay, let's see, and I have nothing. Jaffe?
I'd like 412, the what's on tap pulled. Just a few minor comments.
Okay. So we have that 4, 5, 4, 6, 4, 7, and 412.
Okay. I'll move approval of the other items.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, roll call, please.
Director LaHue,
Yes.
Vice President Lather,
Yes.
Director Jaffe,
Yes.
Director Christensen,
Yes.
and President Daniels.
Yes. So those 4 consent items will be heard at the end of the meeting. So we will now move on. It is time for oral communications. I think we have one person, Becky, signed up to talk here. So we want to turn her on.
Yes.
Ms. Steinbruner, you are now unmuted.
Thank you. Good evening. This is Becky Steinbruner. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, good evening, and thank you for allowing me to speak, and thank you for pulling those items from the consent agenda that I requested. I would like to say that I participated in the online workshop for the Chromium 6 MCL workshop, and I thought it was very interesting. And I look forward to hearing what comes out of that. I also want to remind people that June 3rd is the close of public comment for the Mid-County Groundwater Agency draft groundwater sustainability plan. And I haven't checked that portal in a while, but last time I did, there were only 2 comments. So I've got put mine up. but that's coming along. I also attended or listened in on the last Santa Cruz City Council meeting and heard that the best value design build contract will be coming before the Santa Cruz City Council next month for the water treatment plant, the tertiary water treatment plant, I'm assuming. So I just want to let you know that I am watching those things, and I'm curious to see how this new approach with the best value approach comes along and serves your project. And finally, I do want to let you know that I am submitting an appeal to the California Coastal Commission regarding the consolidated permit for the Pure Water Socal project. And I just want to let you know that I was quite surprised that the commission did not question much of anything. I was expecting a much more thorough investigation, or at least questioning of things. And of note, and very germane to what you're talking about later tonight, was Commissioner Rice's concern about the cost of the water that will be associated with the project. That's all that I have for this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, any director comments here? Dr. LeHue?
Nope, I'm good.
Rochelle?
I'm fine.
Christensen?
Nope, I have nothing. I think some of the things I'm going to talk to you about are on the agenda.
And Jackie?
No comments.
And I have no comment either. So that's it for the oral communications. We don't have any, well, actually we do have a report from District Council. Josh?
Thanks, President Daniels, and good evening, everyone. Just a brief report that I'm sure you saw. The governor has announced the loose guidance for the 4 stages for reopening California, and has delegated some flexibility to individual counties to maybe reopen sooner than statewide, depending on how things locally are going. Of course, in Santa Cruz County, the shelter-in-place order remains in effect, but as staff will continue to monitor that and react appropriately. Thank you.
Okay. All right, administrative business, we have no will serves. We do go now to item 7.2, key findings from the 2020 Soquel Creek Water District Community Survey. And I think this is, who's doing this one?
Melanie.
Hi.
Melanie.
Good evening. Good evening. This is Melanie. I'm going to introduce this item. As one of the main items of tonight's board meeting is the next item, Leslie's item, the district budget and funding priorities. This agenda item that I'm talking and presenting this evening is presented as the district really values incorporating our community's input into our activities, programs, and projects. Last year, the district initiated a hashtag In This Together movement to recognize that our community is working together to address the crisis of seawater intrusion and contamination into our drinking water system, and that we're looking forward to developing a reliable water supply for current and future generations. Over the last 8 weeks, we've seen that our state is also using this as a slogan to address the ongoing issues of the COVID pandemic. And so as part of the hashtag In This Together, it's really important for the district, our board, and our community to work together and gain insight into what our customers think and feel about what the district is doing and how we're doing it. And that's why we focus so much on this process, the community involvement and seeking the public's input. In light of those kind of sentiments and values that we have, it's important for us to kind of bring this information as you start talking about the budget and programs that we will be doing in the future. Gaining public input is something that you guys have always valued. The district has asked staff to conduct surveys in the past, and we've done both phone and online surveys in 2014 and 2015 when we were developing the community water plan and selecting water supply alternatives to further evaluate. Tonight we have Mr. Dave Mentz of FM3 in attendance, who will present some highlights of the draft survey results on topics such as our water supply challenges, customer opinions on what the district should invest in, and their sentiments related to their water bills. We also have some information related to their opinions on the community water plan and also on water recycling, and specifically the Pure Water Soquel project. The survey has asked questions related to outreach and education, and we've asked and sought input on how our customers might get their information to shape our outreach programs in the future. Tonight we are just highlighting some of these questions, and what we would like to do is have Mr. Mentz come back and have the board schedule a presentation at a future board meeting to go over more at length some of the survey results, such as information to shape our community outreach programs. Before I turn it over to Mr. Mentz, I would like to do a brief introduction. Mr. Dave Mentz is a partner in FM3 and has provided opinion, research, and strategic guidance to hundreds of nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and businesses throughout the U.S. before joining the firm in 1998. He regularly researches public attitudes on water quality, water supply, and restoration of critical waters. He's conducted a wide range of research for dozens of different water agencies on topics such as water conservation, to taste and odor of water, to online bill access, to water supply options, including numerous different water supply alternatives, especially on public views of recycled water or desalination. Mr. Mentz has provided research to guide efforts to protect and restore vital and iconic bodies of water, including the Puget Sound, San Francisco Bay, the Mississippi River, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Chesapeake Bay. He received his bachelor's degree in government from Harvard University and a master's in public policy from the Goldman School of Public Policy at the University of California, Berkeley. In December 2019, the Journal of American Waterworks Association had a cover story that focused on the value of survey-informed research and data for water agencies, and Mr. Mentz's work was highlighted in that cover story. I'd like to now turn it over to Mr. Mentz, and then following his presentation, he will be available for questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thanks to all of you for the chance to be with you tonight to share the results of our survey. I'm going to walk through the high-level results of some of the key findings of the survey. We've submitted a more detailed report, and as you'll see on the agenda, you have the option of having me come back to give a more detailed presentation at a later date. Before we dive into the details of the numbers, I will say that the results of the survey are very positive. They show that, as was the case at the time of your last survey in 2015, local residents have a very favorable view of the job being done by the water district and have a high degree of confidence in the district to act to secure reliable supplies of water for the area's future. They are generally content with what they pay for water, especially when given some information about the actual rates that are currently in place. And they also offer broad support for the Pure Water Soquel plan, once given background about how the project works and the ways it will benefit local water supplies. All of this data is very encouraging, and it's pretty consistent with what we have seen in our research for other water districts around the state that have implemented similar plans for potable reuse. So with that preamble, let's go ahead and dive in and look at some of the key findings. I'll walk through the highlights of the survey data, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about them or other survey findings. The numbers that I'm sharing tonight come from the survey of just over 400 residents drawn from lists of likely voters within the Soquel Creek Water District that we conducted in mid-January. The overall survey results have a margin of error of plus or minus 5.7%. And there's a number of places where you'll see we draw comparisons to the 2015 survey that was conducted for the district by GSSR. We kept a number of questions that we asked in the survey the same so that we would have the ability to compare results today with results 4 years ago to see how things evolved over time. Before we dive into the specific findings, I should note that obviously this survey was conducted at the beginning of the year before the COVID-19 pandemic had really set in. And as a result, I think we have to look at these numbers and ask ourselves a question about whether the data would likely be different if we did another survey today. Since mid-March, when the pandemic started, we have conducted surveys for a number of other water districts around California, including some that have focused on potable reuse, as well as a survey for the United States Water Alliance, asking about issues relating to water infrastructure across the country. Each of those surveys that we conducted had some data points from prior years where we had asked similar questions, where we were able to compare results in prior years to post-COVID results today. And what we've generally found is that the numbers are very, very similar. To the extent that the public is obviously concerned about both the health and economic impacts of the coronavirus pandemic, those concerns have joined existing concerns they have about things like water quality and supply, and have not diminished the pre-existing concerns they had about those issues. We're finding that residents today see those addressing those long-term concerns as just as much of a priority as they did a few months ago. So given what we've seen in the context of these other surveys, and given the consistency of opinions within the district over the course of the last 4 years, I think we can be fairly confident that these opinions are durable. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into the key findings, starting with some questions that dealt with big picture views of the district's performance overall. We introduced the district and then asked people whether they thought that in general it is doing an excellent, good, only fair, or poor job. And as you'll see here, 63% of residents rate its performance as either excellent or good, 19% as only fair, and then 11% as poor. What we've generally seen in asking these kinds of questions over the years is that that only fair evaluation is really the equivalent of a C grade. It's basically people saying their performance is acceptable, if not exceptional. So really the comparison between excellent and good on one end of the spectrum and poor on the other shows you those with a strongly positive or negative perception. And that yields roughly a 6-to-1 ratio of positive sentiments to negative ones. It's also notable that the numbers have been very, very stable from year to year. The 2020 data are within a couple of percentage points of where they were in 2015, basically within the survey's margin of error. Similarly, on the next slide, when we asked respondents to indicate how much trust they have in the district to find a responsible solution to water supply issues facing the area, roughly 2/3 indicate that they have either a great deal or some trust in the district. This is only 4 points lower than it was in 2015, and again, that difference is within the survey's margin of error. So basically, the results in 2015 and now are consistent and show that a sizable majority of local residents are confident in the district's ability to secure water supplies to meet the area's needs. Of course, when we're talking about the services the district provides, that also comes at a price, and we wanted to understand how people feel about the rates that they pay. If you flip to the next slide, you'll see responses to a question where we asked people in general if they felt that their water bill was too high, about right, or too low. We asked this question 2 ways. First, without any context or sort of reminders about what they pay, and you'll see a plurality responded that they felt it was about right. Roughly 2 in 5 indicated that they thought it was too high. But after we gave them additional information and let them know that the average customer pays approximately $80 a month and that works out to less than 2 cents per gallon of water, the numbers shifted. And the proportion who indicated they felt it was about right went up to 59%. The proportion who felt it was too high fell to 26%. And while there is a minimal number who think they are paying too little, it actually did increase after we gave them that information about what current rates are, and especially that rate per gallon. We also wanted to evaluate what our respondents knew about where the district gets water from. And so we had a question that asked the respondents to tell us whether they, as far as they know, within the area are getting water from each of the sources you see listed on this slide. It's actually 1 slide back. And you'll see that the source of water that more residents pointed to as a source of water for the district than any other was groundwater pumped up from underground wells. And as we'll see in a minute, there is broad recognition among local residents of some of the challenges that the district faces in terms of protecting those groundwater supplies. About 2 in 5 said the district got its water from creeks and rivers, and then about 1 in 5 from recycled water that has been purified. Fewer than 1 in 5 saying that the district was getting water from the Sierras or from desalination. So looking forward, we also asked the respondents whether they agreed or disagreed with a number of statements about local water supplies. On this slide, you'll see the total proportion that agreed or disagreed with each statement running down the right-hand side. And you'll also see a measure of the intensity of agreement. The dark blue bars on the left represent the proportion who said not just that they agreed, but that they agreed strongly with each statement. And then the light blue are those who indicated they somewhat agreed. So the broadest agreement that we see here, with 9 out of 10 local residents indicating that they're in harmony with these statements, are in those top 2 statements. Investment is needed now to ensure we have a reliable, safe water supply for the future. And Soquel Creek Water District needs to take strong action now to address overdrafting and seawater contamination of our local groundwater. On that latter point, we also see broad recognition that seawater intrusion is a problem facing the groundwater supply. At the bottom of the slide, 69% of those polled agree that seawater is already contaminating our groundwater. So, given that residents generally recognize that groundwater is a key source of water supplies, are concerned about seawater contamination, trust the district to secure long-term supplies of water, and would like to see action and investment right now to pursue that goal, that sort of provides the foundation for their views of the Pure Water Soquel proposal. So we started by introducing the idea of recycled water and asking the respondents to indicate how much they knew about it. We gave them a definition, which you'll see on this slide, which specifies 2 types of recycled water. Water treated for use in park irrigation, gardening, food crops, and landscaping, the type that people are probably most accustomed to from seeing signs out and about where water is used outdoors for those purposes. And then we introduced the second type, purified recycled water, going through multiple advanced treatment processes to meet the highest safety levels required by the California Division of Drinking Water, which is then pumped back into the ground, stored, joined with existing groundwater, where it filters naturally through the ground and then is pumped out again, treated once more, and sent to homes for all uses, including drinking. So we're introducing this notion of indirect potable reuse. It's treated, put back into groundwater, naturally filtered, then pulled out and treated again. And we're making clear that the ultimate use of this water does include drinking. So on the next slide, you'll see we asked our respondents to indicate how familiar they were with this second type of recycled water. And a total of 57% told us that they were at least somewhat familiar with it. Now, questions like this in the survey research industry, we have to take with a grain of salt. They are subject to what we refer to as social desirability bias, which is a polite way of saying that the respondents may be giving us answers that aren't totally accurate. When you ask people, are you familiar with this important public policy issue, there's a natural inclination for people to say, yes, I've heard something about it. And for that reason, we tend to focus more on the top category of responses, those who identify themselves as very familiar, which is probably a better indication of the proportion that have some working knowledge of the subject. And that's only about 1 in 10. Which is fairly common, those percentages, when we do similar types of polls around the state. And it does indicate that there is still room for doing public education and outreach to fill in some of the gaps of what local residents may know about purified recycled water. So with that, we then introduced the Pure Water Soquel project, as you'll see on the next slide. Before that, we also asked people about potential uses of purified recycled water, and asked them to tell us whether they found each of these potential uses as either acceptable or unacceptable. Again, the total acceptable and unacceptable runs down the right-hand side, and the bar graphs to the left show the intensity of that sentiment. Those who find it completely acceptable are highlighted in dark blue, somewhat acceptable in light blue. And so you'll see there are outdoor uses that the public feels very, very positive about: gardening and landscaping, irrigation. Almost 9 out of 10 say they're comfortable with it, and fewer than 1 in 10 are expressing any discomfort. There is a little more divided response at the bottom of the slide when we ask about use in homes and businesses, including for drinking water. Most local residents do find it acceptable, but a little less than 1/3 express some concerns. But when the issue is framed differently, as you'll see in the third item on the slide, which is highlighted in blue, noting that the use of purified recycled water is really to protect the quality of water supplies by replenishing groundwater to prevent further contamination by salt water. We have a very broad degree of acceptance for that use, with 75% indicating that they find it acceptable. So given residents' understanding of the threats of saltwater intrusion and their comfort with the process of indirect potable reuse, as we described earlier, that context is getting a broadly positive response. So we further laid out then the description of pure water Soquel, as you'll see on the next slide. We gave them a description of what it would involve. Already treated wastewater is put through an advanced purification process. That water then replenishes groundwater, prevents seawater from entering the basin. It's then pumped and treated again, eventually becoming part of that broader water supply, delivered for all household uses, including drinking. We wanted to make sure that we were very clear with the respondents that this would be part of their drinking water supply. We then asked if they were comfortable or uncomfortable with the project, and as you'll see on the next slide, they were broadly comfortable with it. 73% overall expressed comfort, just 23% indicated that they were uncomfortable, and that includes almost 1/3 of local residents who describe themselves as very comfortable. These numbers correspond very closely with what we've seen in most parts of California where we've tested similar indirect potable reuse projects. People, given an explanation of the mechanics of how it works, tend to be comfortable. There is a sizable group that qualifies that sentiment, saying that they're somewhat comfortable. And again, that indicates the need for further public education and outreach to provide them with details about how the process works. But in general, very few are expressing significant concerns after hearing that description. As one might expect, as you'll see on the next slide, there is some correlation between the public's comfort with this project and their overall views of the district. This graph shows responses to the question that I just showed you, people's overall level of comfort with pure water Soquel, and breaks out responses to that question by their existing feelings about the district. Above the dashed line, and you'll see the responses to the question about how they would rate the overall performance of the district. The majority who rate it as excellent or good, if you look horizontally across that row, what that's showing is among that subgroup with a positive perception of the district's performance, how they feel about pure water Soquel, and 81% are comfortable. 62% of those who rate the district's performance as only fair are comfortable. And even among that smaller subgroup, about 1 in 10 who rate its performance as poor, almost half indicate that they are comfortable with the project. Which indicates that there is a broad belief that the approach that's embodied in the project is one that's worthwhile, even among some of those who have some skepticism about the district's performance. And at the bottom of the slide, we see a similar dynamic when we break out responses to this question based on the degree of trust that residents have in the district to provide responsibly a water supply for the area. Both those who trust it and those who are more reserved, majorities indicate that they're comfortable with pure water Soquel. So flipping to the next slide, you'll see the overall conclusions of the research. And again, overall very positive. Ratings for the district are both favorable and steady, both in terms of its overall performance and the trust people have in it to deliver a supply of water reliably. Most residents, or plurality of residents, think that water bills are about right, and especially once we remind them about what rates are, that sentiment increases to about 3 in 5 of those polled. While there is some uncertainty about where water comes from, there is a sizable majority that recognizes that groundwater is a key source, and a majority that says that today it is threatened by groundwater intrusion or saltwater intrusion. Residents also embrace the use of purified recycled water, both in concept and in the context of pure water Soquel, and the way by which it would make that part of the district's water supply for all uses, including household use and drinking. So that is an overview of some of the key findings of the survey. I know we hit on a lot of numbers there. I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Before we do that, we're going to take public comment on this item. We have one person, which is Becky. So, Becca, could you bring her up? 2 minutes, correct?
Yes, I'm just switching screens. All right. Ms. Steinbruner, you are unmuted.
Thank you. This is
can hear
Becky
you.
Steinbruner. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think this survey is very interesting. I want to point out to you that according to your letter to Nancy Pelosi and the other legislators, you have 40,400 customers. This is a survey of 427 voters in the district that are likely to participate in the November 2020 election. I want to know why that filter was put on this survey, because I think that in doing so, you may eliminate the poorer households, maybe those who are not English speakers as their first language. And I think this really puts forth a skewed opinion with maybe wealthier. It says most of your respondents were men registered in the Democratic Party. You know, I think these filters have given you the answers that you want, but I don't think that it realistically represents the broad spectrum of those in your district. I think you should take note that 2 in 5 say their water bills are too high. And I would like to know how the survey taker established the average of $80 as an average bill. For someone that is being pounded on to conserve water all the time and their bill may be higher, they would hear that most people's bills are $80 and they would, I think, feel somewhat intimidated. I also think that on page 125, investment in infrastructure is not really defined. And I would like to know more about how that question evolved and how it was explained. Also, in closing, the percentages do not add up to 100.
Becky, your time's up. Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the main reasons that you go to voters is otherwise there'll be one person at a large apartment building who is actually our customer, and there may be 100 people in there who use our water, and you would miss them because we don't know who they are in terms of the district. So that's the best way to get the broad sweep of all of our users in the district, is to use voters. I don't think it was intended as any kind of election thing.
I have to make a little correction just before people get the wrong information.
Go ahead, Tom.
She mentioned that the people surveyed were Democratic men, and that's not the case at all. And maybe Mr. Metz can explain this better, but it's just they were giving the characteristics of the people that were in the very familiar category for purified recycled water. That is all that was.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And I assume that's why we use voters too.
Yes, your explanation of why we reached out to the voting population is part of it. It's also the same methodology that was used for the survey in 2015, and so we wanted to be consistent this year with the same approach that was used before so that we could compare apples to apples.
Yep, another reason. Okay, well, now we're going to go to the board and see if they have any questions or comments or discussion items. So, Tom, actually, you're first.
Okay. Clearly, we still have a ways to go in public education. And I'm still, I think we just, if I'm on the public outreach committee, and I think we just need to putting our heads together to how to get the word out as much as possible. If we still have 14% of the people that still think the water comes from the Sierras, actually a fifth of the people thought we already had purified recycled water. So, and that only 10% are very familiar with that. So just, I think we're doing a good job, but I clearly think we need to examine how we can just do better. That's all.
Yeah. I think, I mean, just a couple of thoughts in reaction. Obviously, there is a role for more public education and outreach. I wouldn't be too discouraged if I were you, because these kinds of results are very typical. You know, pretty much anywhere in the country, when we ask people, sit people down in a focus group and ask them where their water comes from, there will usually be 10 seconds of stunned silence, and then people will say, well, I don't know, the faucet, the pipes, the water district. Relatively few people, and we actually put this to the test in a national survey a couple of years ago. We asked people to identify the original source or body of water that their household drinking water supply came from. And in a national survey, only 25% of Americans were successfully able to do so. So, and this is not to fault the public. Obviously, the average resident has a lot to do during the course of their day and may not pay a lot of attention to where their water comes from, particularly if they don't have particular concerns or worries about it. And they feel like they're well served, as is the case here. On a couple of specific points, I will note that on the slide you see up on the screen, respondents were able to list multiple sources of water. Those numbers do add up to more than 100. So some of the people who were saying things like recycled water or the Sierras were also correctly identifying some of the places that their water comes from. But there is no question that there is still room to advance the public's knowledge and understanding. I will say that in general, over the last 10 or 15 years that we've been doing this kind of research, the degree of public awareness of the potential for potable reuse of recycled water has increased, and the level of public resistance to that use has diminished dramatically. It wouldn't be uncommon that if we asked questions of the kind that we asked in this survey 10 years ago, we'd have solid majorities saying that the use of potable reuse of recycled water was unacceptable to them. So the public may be a little bit slow in developing an understanding and adopting a positive attitude, but that's the direction in which things are moving. And I think your survey results do show that the arrow is pointed the right way, even if there is still further progress to be made.
Rochelle, comments, questions?
I think you've explained most of my questions already. I thought it was really interesting. I went through it real carefully before the meeting, and I was wondering about the Democratic men thing. I knew it was just the knowledge, but you know, knowing what it is. But I noticed when I went door to door that women were more open to recycled purified water than men were back then. So that was interesting.
Okay. Mr. Jaffe? Questions, comments? Does he need to be re-engaged? He may have.
I'll try to check on him.
Okay. He may have muted himself.
I'm trying to unmute him and it's not going.
Okay, thank you.
Emma, can you try?
Yeah, it's not letting me.
I'll reach out to him also.
Okay. Well, why don't we go with Carla while they're looking at that. Carla, do you have any comments or questions?
Yeah, I do. I mean, most of my questions were answered, and the survey kind of reflects the cross-section of opinions I gained from campaigning in two elections. And the same thing, a wide variety of responses on where our water comes from. And also, honestly, somebody said, we vote for you to take care of this for us and make sure that everything goes well with our water supply. So I also had a reflection of that trust in the district, and they count on us to really provide good water, and it shows up on this survey. So it's kind of interesting to me. And it does, the fact in terms of making sure we can continue on our schedule to get the supplemental water supply in, I think we have some more educational work to do. So that's, if there are more details in this, I'd like to know, because I'd like to find some avenues to, ways to get the information out to more people in our district.
Okay. Is that all?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
Karen.
So interesting presentation. My take home is things have changed a bit, but not a lot, which actually is remarkable in some ways, considering how much the bills have gone up and how the lengths we're going to have to take to ensure a safe, reliable water supply in the future. I had a question about page 131, which is the one with linking performance and pure water Soquel. Can you put that up on the screen?
There it is. I think that's up on the screen now.
Yeah.
That's it.
So that's the one. Yeah.
131.
So first, yes, that's it. So first, a comment. The big red 50% associated with poor, and am I right in interpreting that 50% of the people who gave us a poor rating also are very uncomfortable with pure water Soquel?
Exactly right.
Okay. Well, and so 11% gave us a poor rating, plus or minus 5.7%. So that puts it in 5 to 15% roughly. So somewhere like 1 in 10, or give or take, actually are uncomfortable with pure water Soquel, who also think we're doing a poor job. So I think that's really interesting.
That's right. It's probably more like 1 in 20
It
with the
could be
margin of
1 in
error.
20. Yeah, yeah, right, because it's half of it, right? And then on this same slide, I did not get with the dashed line and a great deal / some and only a little / not really at all.
It's just separating two different questions. So the top half of the slide is separating responses to the question about their comfort with pure water Soquel based on their rating of the district's overall performance. And then below the dashed line, it's a separate question. It's separating their views of pure water Soquel based on their trust in the district to responsibly secure supplies of water for the area. So they're similar types of questions, but separate. And so we just showed both on the same slide.
Right. Okay. So it's kind of interesting to me that there are people that don't trust us. A smaller percentage of the people who don't trust us are not against pure water Soquel. If I read that, the 29% versus 50%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
They're both subgroups of relatively small subsets to begin with. But overall, what the findings do indicate is even some people who are skeptical of the district for one reason or another still are comfortable with the basic concept of the project.
Right. And then the other thing that struck me about this is on page 128 about the use of purified recycled water. And what struck me about this is we still need education because there's a large people are fine with it being used in gardens and landscaping, but when you get to use in the home and businesses, including drinking water, there's a still significant portion that says completely unacceptable or somewhat unacceptable. So it just reinforces my thought that we need to get to continue and even accelerate outreach. So those are my comments. Thank you.
I would agree with you, that Bruce, that the health issue is still a big one. I mean, to keep pushing that. In fact, I think that correlates very closely with the concern about COVID-19 in your water supply, which I think most of us will agree is not really an issue, but a lot of people are still worried about it because, you know, it's a trust question of their health, and that's a problem. As I've done in many other previous years, it's interesting that the biggest outfall for all this is the 40% who think their water comes from rivers and creeks. And once again, I think the best way to fix that would be to change the name of the district, because we have never taken water from the creek, even though that is in our name, because that's the origins of the district back in, I think, the 50s. So we want to fix that one. That's how to do that. So that's all I have. We now need.
Yeah, Bruce, I agree with you on that. I don't know what the right time is, but I do think that we should do that at some point.
And I think that would also help the other things here too. That if you think your water comes from a creek, then you're not going to be too upset or concerned about, you know, pure water Soquel, because that's groundwater. Well, we don't take any groundwater, right? Take it all out of a creek. So that would focus that too. So anyway, I'm not sure about the time either. Now staff has given us a sample question that they would like to see for this, about having this come back to us.
Whether they want a report?
Yes. I'm on down a little bit more. There, possible board action. Direct staff to return at a future date with completed survey report. I'd like to hear what the complete report would be. Is there questions that we have not been shown, for example?
So this is Ron. That the report is not finalized yet, and Mr. Meth can talk to what else is out there. But what we felt was important, since there was some results that would inform the budget discussion, we wanted to try to put that in front of the board and the public as early as possible. So Mr. Mess, if you want to add to what else is part of the presentation when you do the full report.
Yeah, and it would essentially be more detail on some of the questions we talked about tonight, more demographic breakdowns. And then there's a handful of other questions in the survey that sort of explore the concepts around pure water Soquel and attitudes toward the district in a little bit more detail, looking at elements that might relate to messaging and communications.
Okay.
So it's basically just going deeper on the subjects that we touched on tonight.
Okay.
I have a comment about that. I'd like to see a report. And is it possible, or you probably could do this in your sleep, to put in, you know, how the methods that you use are standard, and you know, address some of the concerns about perhaps there being bias in the survey. And then the other thing I'd like to see in the report is a recommendation, and I'm not sure whether or not you can do this authoritatively or not, just on when you would recommend another survey. That's somewhat you know, a decision based on, you know, what the district wants to know, but there might be some constraints also in doing a survey after the survey.
Yeah. I also had a question for future, or for the report, is there any way to kind of give a little perspective on how this compares with other similar districts, so we kind of know where we stand, because we know how it is compared to previous ones, but I don't have an idea of how that is that fairly common or not, that particular type of answer. And then also if there's any experience on how other entities have improved those ratings, you know, over time.
Yeah, and I think we could, for example, pull some data from the surveys we've done for the U.S. Water Alliance, where we've asked people similar questions on a national level, and that just probably provides the best benchmark to compare to.
Okay, thank you.
Well, does that mean that we would like to find out, get comparative information on certain points that we should direct you on certain points that were in this presentation that you have experience with other districts?
I think it's more a matter of where we have relevant points of comparison. We'll just add those in. And for most of the core questions, we do have some analog that we could pull in from another source.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, it'd be good to know.
And this is Melanie.
Go ahead, Melanie.
I think Mr. Mentz had mentioned that, you know, the survey did tier off of the 2015 that the district, community survey that the district did. And so I think in that report too, he's going to add a little bit more correlation on some of the questions that were very similar. And then just, you know, for the board and for our public, we do have all of the other surveys that we've conducted on our website.
I was going to say that I think most of the results here are pretty positive, and it would be good to know, you know, what is even possible out there. You never can get 100%, so it's trying to get 100% is a waste of time and effort. But if we can get it somewhat better, that might be worthwhile. So it's good to know what the maximum practical limits for these are relative to what we've got now. So someone would make this motion or something like it?
I'll move. I'll move.
Okay, go ahead. Okay. So Carla moves.
To approve, but motion 1, yeah. Okay.
And
Tom, I think you seconded before I was going to, so go ahead.
So did Tom get it or did you get it, Bruce?
I think Tom got it.
Okay, okay. Anyway, we have a motion and we have a second. So we need a roll call, please.
Director LaHue,
Yes.
Vice President Luther,
Yes.
Director Jaffe,
Yes.
Director Christensen,
Yes.
and President Daniels.
Yes, and I want to thank you, Mr. Metz, for coming and giving some interesting results.
Thank you very much.
It really is. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, we are done with that agenda item.
And your staff, I think, is very valuable.
Pardon? Okay, I think we're done with that agenda item, so we now move to the next agenda item, 7.3, which is our financial report. Discuss economic conditions, funding forecasts, and budget formulation, and review/seek input on the FY 2021 draft budget projections.
So this is Leslie, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 2020-21 budget presentation, which is unique in a number of different ways. I'd like to go ahead. We do have a presentation. I don't know. There we go. I didn't know if we wanted to pull that up or not. That's perfect. So yeah, this is the 2020-21 draft budget. And we've usually presented the budget in a workshop type format. So this is the first year we're just kind of doing this as a memo item. And so the memo was fairly robust. And I would encourage you all, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have as we go through this because there is a lot of material. So just let me know if you've got any questions. So moving to the first slide, we're talking a little bit about our planning environment. This has been one of the most interesting budget years I've worked on since I've been with the district. There have been a lot of variables, not many constants, which makes planning like trying to hit a constantly moving target. The more uncertainty there is in the planning environment, the more we need to be cautious and prudent with our planning and forecasts. So the budget efficiencies we've enacted within the last few years have allowed the district to be as efficient as possible with the use of our ratepayer funds. We've added flexibility to our line item operating budgets to allow funds to be moved to where they are needed most by the managers, thereby eliminating some redundant budgeting that tends to happen with a line item budget. We've introduced priority-based budgeting for our projects budget for our capital and operating projects. So we use objective criteria to identify those projects that are the highest priority. The district had to cut over $1 million this year in order to balance the budget. And without some of these budgeting efficiencies in place, the items we would have had to cut would have been much greater. So we've already laid a good foundation for fiscal sustainability, and it's just something we need to build on as we move forward. The economic conditions in which we formulated this year's budget are unprecedented. The impacts of a recessionary economy and COVID-19 on area unemployment, vendors with whom we have contracts, the costs of materials and supplies, and customer payment delinquencies. These are all unknowns for us at this point. They're issues that we're trying to work through. We don't expect a tremendous impact on water use. Most of the decreased water use is expected to be in the commercial sector. And since only about 11 to 13% of our water use is commercial, I don't think we'll be heavily impacted on the water use side of things. However, the American Water Works Association report that was done by Raftellus projected a 6% increase in delinquency rates, which may impact the district at some point. So we'll have to work with our customers on payment plans and payment arrangements to ensure that we can keep those delinquency rates just as low as we can. But it's impacting us at a point when our water sales revenue is already projected to be about $1.1 million lower than anticipated when compared to the finance plan. And in addition, there's some speculation that in California, we're in the midst of a mega drought, and that combined with global warming may have some economic implications when it comes to water agencies as well. So like I said, a lot of variables right now, a lot of unknowns. So it's important in this type of uncertain planning environment that we consider our financial decisions pretty carefully. Ron used a phrase I really liked. He said, "We have already been frugal, but now we need to be prudent." And it's because we just don't know what's going to happen over the next year with the economy, with unemployment, with the pandemic, with water use, or even with the climate. So we just need to be really prudent with our planning. And so we'll slip on to the next slide now, which is our customer care slide. And I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to Ron and let him talk a little bit about some of the measures we put in place to assist our customers.
Thank you, Leslie. Yes, this is Ron. We know a while back the board was interested as we move forward formulating our budget and pursuing sustainability, taking care of the customers. It's about the aquifer, making sure it is healthy long-term, and taking care of the customers. I mean, the board keeps putting that foremost in front of us. So because budgets and rates have a correlation, we wanted to add this in here because this is where what we think the customers really are concerned about at the end of the day. And we see it in today's environment as kind of two distinctions: this near-term crisis, the COVID-19, and the long-term seawater intrusion crisis. And we believe we've got a good care package, if you will, for our customers. In the short term, we've already outlined, Leslie and her team have done just a tremendous job of interfacing with the customers and helping them, and Shelley's group, on an individual level. And I can't say that enough, what it means, I think, to anybody to hear somebody pick up the phone and dialogue one-on-one with you. But, we had the programs in place before they were mandatory that we decide we're not going to shut anybody off. We're going to stand with our customers side by side if they're having a hard time during this pandemic. And so we instituted that early on before it was regulated. It is now mandated, but we had that before. Also, late fees. We said there'll be no late fees associated with this time period of the pandemic, and working with people on extended payment plans. We know there may be a couple real tough months here, so we want to work with them on that. And it's not just about paying the bills, but it's also about how can you use less water, right? And I think this district is one of the best at helping our customers do that, and our customers have shown they are some of the best at doing that. So we've adapted. Roy has taken up the virtual conservation surveys, and I hear they're going pretty well. It's mainly a phone type thing, but walking them through, Roy can do that in his sleep. He's done so many, and he's great with the customers. So we have this immediate near-term thing going on. And I've seen what other agencies have been doing. I think we're at the top of the realm there. I will also say that if it gets more dire for our customers, we've also got listed in the memo some other potential programs that we might want to invoke down the road if the need comes. We don't want to invoke those unless needed because they do take a lot of effort, but if our customers need it, then we could do that. And we mentioned such thing as crowdsourcing or something along those lines. So that's in the near term, which we think is, on everybody's mind. And we're very proud about the approach we've taken there. In the longer term, there's a couple programs that have been listed before the state, and we've been following that and even chimed in on a few of their programs that they're trying to come up with. And they've got 3 options. I won't go through them, but we have hope that some of that will come to fruition to help really the people who are much less fortunate on their income. In addition to that, looking down the road further, we've come to realize one of the things that we know we're sensitive to is that a tiered rate structure, which almost every agency has, does not fully account for large families. It's harder on large families and doesn't have unless it's a water budget based approach. So we're thinking longer term, as the current rate implementation schedule comes to renewal in a couple years, and we have AMI in place and tested, that could be another approach that the board might want to look at is, do we want to gather back our, maybe some of the team, I think we had like 12 members of the public work with us on a rate structure, maybe look at water budgets at that point in time, which would be, family or household specific. So in a nutshell, I think we've got some programs in the near term and potentially in the long term, if we want to explore that, we're looking out for our customers. So thank you, Leslie.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and move on to funding streams. Most of the projects in our project budget will be funded through funds collected from water rates, which we call PAYGO funds, as well as $740,000 in funds held in reserve from our capital infrastructure repair and replacement reserve. But the district has also been awarded a number of different funding streams for the Pure Water Soquel project. The State Water Resources Control Board has awarded the district a $50 million Proposition 1 implementation grant and up to $36 million in a low interest loan from the Seawater Intrusion Control Fund. And then the remainder of the project is expected to be paid for by a low interest loan from the EPA's Water Infrastructure and Financing Innovation Act, or we call it WIFIA. The district is still waiting to hear when those funds will be forthcoming from a Bureau of Reclamation Title 16 grant that we've applied for. And if that's received, that would be used then to pay down some of the low interest loans. We wouldn't take out as much probably in WIFIA, or we would retire some of the WIFIA. So in order to work with the timing of the disbursements from these various funding sources, we will need to secure some interim debt financing and ensure the district has adequate cash flow while we're waiting for reimbursement from the state and federal programs. So the funds received from these programs will then be reused to retire the interim debt. So it's kind of like a daisy chain effect where we take out this debt and then we retire it with the state and federal program funding that as it comes through. So we're currently working with a financial advisor and a rating agency, 2 rating agencies actually, to try and secure the best fit for interim financing for the district. And I've given you a lot of information in the memo about how the different funding streams work. But if you've got any questions along those lines, I'm happy to go ahead and answer them. And then we'll move into some long-term financial planning. And what we always try to do since we've done a finance plan is to kind of connect that long-range planning that we started with a couple of years ago to our budget projections. It's always prudent to keep comparing those budget projections back to that finance plan that was developed in 2018, because the finance plan really serves as the basis for our cost of service water-based, or our cost of service-based water rates. If we can stay pretty consistent with the spending levels anticipated in the finance plan, then we know that we have the rates in place to sustain that level of service. So we'll move on to the financial policies. A key component of our financial sustainability, a lot of the work that we've done over the last few years, is our financial policies. The district adopted a debt management policy in 2017, and that establishes the acceptable use of debt funding, which is the acquisition, refurbishment, replacement, or expansion of our capital assets. Our existing debt covenants have a debt coverage ratio requirement of 1.2. But in order to be prudent and ensure that we have adequate resources to comfortably make our debt payments, even in uncertain economic times like we may be dealing with here shortly, the district has set a minimum debt coverage ratio target internally of 1.7. And then next slide. In addition to the debt management policy, the district also adopted a reserve policy in 2017. Reserves are made up of our operating contingency reserve, the rate stabilization reserve, and the capital facilities reserve. And the operating contingency reserve is designed to cover unplanned emergency expenditures that are not anticipated during the budget formulation process, and to ensure the district can cover our operating expenditures in the event of some sort of catastrophic disruption of revenue. So the rate stabilization reserve, in contrast, is it's currently just a static $2 million reserve, and it's designed to augment our operating revenues for the purposes of calculating our debt coverage ratio if a situation were ever to arise where the district was in imminent danger of not meeting those minimum debt coverage requirements. The district adopted a policy where the combined balances of the operating contingency reserve and the rate stabilization reserve together are to be maintained at 40% of our annual operating expenditures. But as we take on additional debt, it'll likely become necessary to reevaluate that amount held in that rate stabilization reserve to ensure that we have an amount adequate to positively impact the debt coverage ratio if we ever need to release those funds and move them into operating revenues. The Capital Facilities Reserve was established in 2018, and it's funded by any gains in net position that we have in a fiscal year. And the board appropriates those funds annually if there are any gains in net position. So the reserve is for the maintenance, repair, or replacement of existing district water system infrastructure. So this is kind of that bucket of funds that we have to try and keep our existing system functioning adequately. It's been used over the last couple of years to fund some booster pumps and some variable frequency drives and a backwash tank roof. It's also been used to supplement the funds for the automated meter infrastructure project, the AMI project, until funds from the water demand offset program are available to reimburse the capital facilities reserve. So we've kind of used it as a stopgap there. So the next slide are the assumptions that we included in that 2018 finance plan. It was developed by Raftellus as part of our rate study back in 2018. And we had Raftellus model two different scenarios. One of the scenarios was a supplemental supply project that was entirely debt funded. And then we had them model a supplemental supply project that was partially funded by grants. So in order to be prudent in setting rates, the district opted for the scenario where a $90 million supplemental supply project was built with debt funding and no grants. And the reason for this approach was because the full project costs weren't really known at that time. We were working off of a class 4 engineering estimate that projected a project cost anywhere from about 60 to 135 million. And the funding streams had not been fully identified yet for the project. So it was prudent to continue, or it was prudent to use that $90 million marker. And it's still prudent to continue, I think, planning for a $90 million debt funded project because of the economic uncertainty around COVID-19 and the impact that that might have on construction costs. So I think we're still okay on where we had forecasted and planned to be with that particular scenario. The inflationary factors that we used in the finance plan, we used a general inflation rate of about 3%. Salaries were 6% inflationary rate, whereas benefits, employee benefits were only 5%. We used the 5% for the chemicals and the energy as well. Capital was inflated at 4% annually, and then our interest earnings, I believe, were inflated at 1% annually. Although we'll obviously see a decrease in our projected interest earnings, I think, this year. So then when we kind of just take a look at our capital improvement plan, our project budget, it includes both our operating and capital projects, but if we exclude Pure Water Soquel from that, we're coming in at about 7.1 million, which is about 1.8 million less than we had projected in the finance plan. And most of that reduction is deferred projects that we deferred to balance the budget because of the lower than expected water sales. But deferring, I just wanted to give you guys this slide to look at, because deferring those projects means pushing them off to later budget years. They don't go away, they just get deferred. And that has an impact on future spending and consequently probably future rate projections. So we'll just have to continue to monitor and refine our capital planning pretty carefully to smooth out some of those impacts in some of the future years. And then the slide on comparing the budget to the revised finance plan, or the finance plan done in 2018. When we compare the proposed budget to that finance plan, the farther you go out, obviously in a financial plan, the more uncertainty there is in the numbers. But beginning reserves this year was higher in the finance plan because we had anticipated taking out about 28.5 million in debt in the finance plan. And that hasn't happened yet for this year. It was supposed to be done in 1920, and we haven't yet done it. So that means we're projecting a higher debt issuance in the budget for next year than what was forecasted in the finance plan. Because in the finance plan, we were going to borrow 28.5 million this year and 28.5 million next year. So now instead, I've just kind of combined that, and we're borrowing about 57.7 million next year. So that's going to be pretty close to where we had projected being, but it does throw off that debt issuance number and beginning reserves a little bit in our comparison. Our operating revenues we're kind of seeing that decrease due to lower water use. And water use is still higher than the protective pumping goal. So we're still endangering our aquifers, and a supplemental supply project is still needed. But water use is not as high as we had expected when forecasting the finance plan. So that means the rate increase is only providing us about a 3% increase in revenue rather than the projected 9% increase in revenue that we thought we would get off the rates. If we had structured the rates to collect more on the volumetric component, that effect would have been amplified. So it was prudent to put more on the service charge side and kind of reduce our reliance on the volumetric rates a little bit. That helps stabilize that slightly. Operating expenses are slightly less than forecasted in the finance plan, as we've worked really hard to be frugal and keep those costs under control. Capital projects are higher with the addition of the Pure Water Soquel project, as those construction timelines and cost estimates continue to kind of be refined. And then ending reserves are expected to be lower in the finance plan as that interim debt is spent. Because of the shift in the construction timelines, we're spending more of that interim debt in 2021. But the debt coverage ratio is going to be better in the budget because we've got about 5 million in grant proceeds that are expected to trickle in this next year, and that can kind of be used to offset that debt. So that's looking better on the debt coverage ratio side for us. So I'm just going to move through the next couple of slides that are things that we cut in order to balance the budget. We had some operating costs. We cut about 1.2 million overall, 1.1 to 1.2 million, which is where we were seeing ourselves short on the revenue side. So we've cut operating supplies, We've reduced paving and backfill costs. I know that conservation cut their rebates by quite a bit. We've reduced computer supplies and training costs, cell phone replacements, that type of thing. We've all reduced or deferred to the following year. We've got a new audit firm this year, so the savings wasn't great, but they did come in a little less than the prior auditor did. And in the next screen, we've got those projects that were deferred to later years. We do have a water purchase from the city of Santa Cruz that was reduced from 150 million to 90 million. And it's because that's, sorry, 150,000 to 90,000. You're right, thank you. Because that is closer to what we've typically spent in a given year on water transfers for one reason or another, either because of water quality issues, etc. So it seemed prudent to go ahead and reduce the anticipated budget for that water purchase this year and then allocate those funds for use elsewhere. So that's what we did. So we're going to move now into the budget itself, and we'll go ahead and walk you through some of these assumptions. Water sales is projected to be 14.7 million. And what we used to calculate water sales were our actual consumption projections from April 2019 to March 2020. That's a little bit lower than what we were seeing in the finance plan itself. And I've kind of given you a breakdown of where we were seeing that water use reduction. The only area of water use that increased was actually multifamily residential. Tier 1 water use increased slightly. Probably the biggest reduction we've seen is the tier 2 use on the single family side has reduced by 15%. So we've gone ahead and made adjustments to our projections for consumption based on what we're seeing in terms of actual use. We do have a scheduled rate increase projected for January 2021. But as I said, water sales is coming in about 1.1 million less than we had anticipated. And then our water service charges are going to be about 8.3 million, and that includes a 6% contingency for suspended accounts. And that's accounts where we have a meter in the ground, but we simply don't have an active sign up, so we don't know who to charge for that monthly service charge. And then on the rest of the revenue assumption side of things, agency reimbursements are simply what we expect, mainly for the city of Santa Cruz to support our water transfer efforts in terms of testing. They reimburse us a certain amount for that. We do expect about 5.6 million in grant disbursements on the Prop 1 implementation grant if our reimbursement calculations are accurate. And then we've got the water capacity fees and the water demand offset fees. And then our other operating revenue and of course non-operating revenue, which is our interest income on investments. And we're moving a lot of our investments away now as those CDs mature. I'm not rolling them over into new CDs because I think we need to keep our funds liquid right now. And new CDs are not generating that much in the way of interest anyway. I think a 5-year CD is about 1% interest right now. So it's not significant. So I'm trying to keep those funds liquid. So I don't anticipate a lot in the way of non-operating revenue for next year. And then when we take a look then at the sources of our funds, which is kind of what we've just walked through, we see that the biggest portion of our sources of funds for our budget is actually that 57.7 million we'll be taking out in new debt. That's temporary. It will be retired by any grants and low interest state and federal loans that we get. But obviously our other most significant source of revenue then are our water sales and our service charges. We do expect to go ahead and use the remaining certificate of participation on our Soquel Drive main replacement project this year. So we'll go ahead and draw that down. And then, like I said, we hope to see about $5.6 million in grants. So those are the sources of our funds for this particular budget year. And then we'll go into some of our expenditures, starting with personnel costs. We anticipate the addition of two full-time equivalents this year to our staffing costs. They're both limited term positions. One of the positions was already approved by the board back in July of 2019, and that position has actually already been filled. And then we'll be adding one more position to that. We don't anticipate any retirements this year. When we go to the next slide, we can see that our wages are expected to increase about 6% over the prior year, which is exactly what had been forecast in the finance plan. So that was a happy happenstance there. And that includes the additional 2 FTE. So we're holding wages right where we thought they would be. On the benefits side, however, we had anticipated our benefits would increase by about 5% a year, and that just hasn't proven to be the case. Our overall benefits are going to go up by a little over 12%. Most of that is retirement and pension costs. That's 16.14% increase. Health benefits are next, and then we've got some miscellaneous benefits that aren't contributing too much to the overall cost increases. But you can see, you know, it's just interesting if you look back at the previous slide real quick, you can see that we started out back in 2014-15 with over 50 FTE. A lot of those were temp positions that we trimmed. We got down to a low of 43.5. Now we're moving into 47.8. But then if you go back to the following slide, you can see that our personnel costs have just continued to increase pretty steadily despite all that movement in our FTE. And that's simply kind of the nature of a service agency such as ours, where most of our budget is wrapped up in, most of our operating budget is wrapped up in personnel costs because we are a service agency. So I am going to go ahead now and move to just our department budgets. The operations and maintenance budget, they have increased their groundwater management and rain stream gauge expenses, general hydrology and on-call services, both an additional $12K there. We've increased groundskeeping expenses for the Glenwood survey and some tree mitigation, but they've decreased their power. Labs and water treatment costs are expected to increase. But overall for the year, there's only been about a 4.18% increase in operating expenses in that department. So they've done really, really good at trying to keep that below 5%. Let me move my slide, sorry. Okay, and then in the engineering department, there's been a slight increase on the well services and engineering supplies side, computers, that type of thing, but offset by decreases in training and office supplies. So overall, their increase in base operating expenses was only 5.45%. On the conservation and customer service field slide, they have about an $18,000 increase in services and meters, and that's for annual maintenance on our new AMI base stations and repeaters that are going in. There's been a decrease in their outreach rebates and meter reading supplies. That was a significant cost reduction for them. And then they've increased some of their conservation supplies and services in order to perform the work on the urban water management plan. So overall, their base operating expenses have increased by about 6.43% this year. And that urban water management plan is every 5 years, I believe, and it does kind of hit us in the budget when it does come around. It's kind of like the election. When it comes around, we're kind of stuck with those costs, and then it decreases the following year. Then as far as the administrative budget, this year, it's hard to do a cost comparison on what they were doing the prior year for both this budget and the special projects budget, because last year, the administration budget included special projects and communications, and this year we have split them into two different departments. So we'll be able to do a cost analysis on increases and decreases in their projected expenditures next year, but it was awfully hard to put that together this year. But the administrative department decreased their professional development and management and computer services. They decreased what was going, oh, I already said that in professional development would be training, but they've also decreased their participation in some professional organizations. And then there's a $50K increase in legal services. In terms of the special projects budget, like I said, we've split that into its own department now. We do have the addition of the 2 FTE for the 2 water resource planners positions. Those are both limited term positions. We've got an increase of $9,000 in outreach supplies and services. And then we do have some increases in special project supplies and services, as well as some professional development costs. And that's expected when you're adding staff like that. And then in the finance and business services department, we have, of course, some increases in insurance and utilities, postage, and our network administration costs, but we've also got decreases in collection and account maintenance costs. We're doing a lot of our collection work in-house. Courtney McAvoy has taken that on, and she's done a terrific job coordinating those efforts and talking to our customers and helping them work through some of their collections issues. And then we've got a overall 3.75% increase in overall base operating expenses in that department. And then in HR, we do have some funding in the budget for a part-time summer intern. And then we have some slight increases in some office, computer, and HR supplies and services. Overall, a 4.86% increase in base operating expenditures. So that's our operating budget and how it plays out. Your budget packet, your included a lot of worksheets that give you all of the detail. You've also got a lot of detail then in our capital projects, our projects budget, which is both operating projects and capital improvement projects. On the operating projects side, we do not have to give any money to support the MGA this year. They are expecting some grant proceeds to come in, and that combined with what's already there in beginning reserves is sufficient to not need any contributions from the member agencies this year. We, like I had mentioned previously, we did reduce the amount that we're giving for that water purchase from the city of Santa Cruz from $150,000 to $90,000. Last year it was at $160,000, but we didn't spend that. We spent closer to the $90,000 mark. We've got a tank reco planned. We've got some assessments for the Rio Del Mar Sumner Railroad crossing. We've got some tree mitigation and some repairs to the ironwood tank roof. We have a new project this year. It's the America's Water Infrastructure Act Risk Resilience Assessment. This is mandatory that we participate. Excuse me. So we'll be participating in that this year. And then we've got a network switch replacement project as we continue to maintain our network infrastructure. On the capital improvement project side, we have some projects planned for pay-go funding. We're continuing to do a feasibility study on the 123 TCP treatment at the Country Club well. Then we've got the ammonia treatment at O'Neill's that will be continuing. We're going to begin work on some main replacement projects, one at St. Andrews Drive and Baltusrol, and then one along Huntington. So this isn't the full cost of the main replacement, but this does get that started, and you'll see additional funding in it for the following year. We've got a service installation and trench repair on Alta Drive, and then we're projecting to replace some fleet vehicles, a small dump truck, and a valve exercise trailer. On the capital facilities reserve side, we do have some projects we'll be funding there. We had 740,000 that we anticipated funding, but subsequent to my putting the budget packet together, I was informed that these two at the bottom, the variable frequency drives at Rosedale and the one at Garnet, that were projected to be completed this year with those capital facilities reserve funds won't be completed this year. They'll need to be rolled over to next year. So we'll be spending 880,000 out of that for next year. But that just means there's 140,000 we won't be spending this year. So because it's kind of it's a reserve pot, we'll just be moving that funding into next year instead. We're going to go ahead and complete the AMI project. That should be done here early summer, and that'll need another 580,000. That is temporary. We will replenish the capital facilities reserve with money from the water demand offset program once that comes in. And then we've got some booster station upgrades and upgrades to the Austrian booster pumps as well that we'll use that capital facilities reserve for. I can tell I've been talking too long because I'm starting to get, my throat's starting to get tight. On the certificates of participation funding side of things, we do have funds left from the 2013 certificates of participation. And with that, we're going to go ahead and try and finish up that Soquel Drive cast iron main replacement project. It's a carryover from this year. We didn't get it completed this year, so we'll roll those funds over, and then we'll have probably a little bit left over. And I want to try and use those funds up and get them off our plate. So I think we'll go ahead and try and use the remainder of the funds on the Quail Run Tank design. The construction of the tank will require some new debt issuance, and that's something we'll be planning for next year. But then we'll also have some new debt issuance for the Pure Water Soquel project. So when we take a look at the total uses of our funds at 86.5 million, you can see the vast majority of what we're spending is on capital improvement, followed by debt service. And that debt service does include some projected debt service on new debt. And then, of course, we've got salaries and benefits as a service agency. Those are, again, our largest operating expenditures. We have some other post-employment benefits for our retiree health care. And then we have supplies and services and our operating projects. So that's where we'll be using our funds. And then we'll talk real quick about debt coverage ratio. When we calculated this year, we're expected to be here at 2.79, which is right about where we were last year. Last year we were at 2.78. So we're doing okay on our debt coverage ratio. We're higher than projected in the finance plan, and we're higher than that target coverage ratio of 1.7. And then the following slide is simply kind of a look at the trends in our debt coverage ratio over time. You can see where it dipped when we took out the 2011 certificates of participation, dipped a little bit again in 2013 when we took out the 2013 certificates of participation, and now it's slowly beginning to creep back up. We've made a very concerted effort to try and get that level up again so we can prepare ourselves for a new debt issuance. And in terms of our change in reserves, you can see our total ending reserves has increased by about 5.1 million. That is mainly the grant proceeds that we expect to trickle in, and then those grant proceeds will be used in subsequent years for cash flow and for retiring any interim debt. We have drawn down that capital facilities reserve the last couple of years. We're continuing to use that as needed. And as I stated when we started, we may need to revisit what we're keeping in the rate stabilization reserve in light of the fact that we're taking on some new debt. I did take a look, Melanie shared with me the City of Santa Cruz Water Department's pro forma budget. And I noticed that they've actually got 10 million in their rate stabilization reserve. So we will need to consider increasing that as we take on that additional debt. And now we're just moving into what the timeline is, the next steps for our budget. I hope to bring back at the May 19th meeting a proposed interim loan agreement for some interim financing to help with cash flows so that we can try and get that finalized and executed either by the end of June or 1st of July. Then we'll have the presentation of our budget again June 2nd. If there's any input that we need to incorporate at that point, we can, and if needed, we'll bring it back for final budget adoption at the June 16th meeting. So that's it for our budget presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
While we do that, let's take on our public comment. I think we just have Becky as the only person who wants to comment. Turn her on, please.
Ms. Steinbrenner, you are now unmuted.
Thank you. This is Becky Steinbrenner. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I think this is a very interesting presentation, and I am not one of your customers, but I am worried for your customers because of this very high debt, taking on an additional $58 million in new debt and increasing your debt service to nearly $4 million a year, $5 million a year. Where will this money come from? Your water sales are going down. People are conserving all they can, and yet you continue to raise your rate. So how is this going to work out? I see that on page 140, you expect to get $50,000 income in penalties from people who cannot pay their bills. And I see that you sent someone to a webinar on how to collect unpaid bills with the California Special District warrants. So this is all really disturbing to me, to see that you are willing to go into such grave debt and not really analyze other alternatives. I have seen no effort at all to pursue temporary emergency water rights for the San Lorenzo River. And I just really want to implore you to put the brakes on this whole thing. You're driving yourselves and the customers into the dirt with all of this debt. And I think it's interesting that you now publicly admit that Raftellus formulated these rate increases to pay for this, when at the time in November of 2018, you assured everybody there that that was not the case. I also am worried that your report says that you increase and you expect an increase in the number of tier 2 ratepayers with AMI.
Time's up. Okay, so we're back. So now we get to discuss this, have questions we can ask and so forth. So let's start with directors like you. Tom?
Becca, please unmute Tom.
And it wouldn't let me. There we go.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry. Leslie, I was wondering, in some of the options for interim funding, there was a mention of a revolving credit agreement. So if you could just clarify for me how that would work and what the odds are of getting that kind of agreement, because from what I read, it sounded like the most flexible way to go.
It is the most flexible way to go. That is our preferred option. And we have actually heard back from one of the respondents, CoBank. So I'm hoping that this is going to be a good fit for us. But what a revolving credit agreement functions like is it kind of functions almost like well, it's a line of credit, but it differs from a line of credit in that once you pay back some of it, that money becomes available for borrowing again. So it's like a credit card, right? You can borrow from your credit card, but when you pay it off, that money becomes available to you to use again. So that's the same premise behind a revolving credit agreement. You pay a standby rate to have the bulk of the funds available, and then you pay a different rate for what you actually borrow. So there's two different rates. There's a minimal rate for what they're holding in reserve for you to use, and then there's the actual interest rate you pay on the funds that you draw down. So that's how a revolving credit line works, and it would be the most flexible for us. We could draw the funds as needed. We could repay them as needed. So it's the most flexible option.
Seems like that would minimize the amount of interest we end up having to pay.
Yeah, it would probably over time.
Okay.
So we're hopeful that that's going to be the solution that works for us, and we hope to be able to bring an agreement to you at the next board meeting.
Great, thank you.
Is that it, Tom?
Yeah.
Okay. Rochelle?
Yeah, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Mr. Jaffe?
Impressive report, Leslie. I especially liked your presentation simplifying things. I don't really have any questions at this point. It seems like you're proceeding in a way that will ensure that we'll be able to meet obligations and do what we need to in terms of supplemental water supply.
Okay, Carla?
Yeah, I just wanted to move on. It's I thought it was a very impressive budget analysis. Thank you. And I wanted to move to the effect of the AMI, since it sounds like we are moving toward getting that, you know, the entire district connected to the smart meters. And what have you been able to figure out what effect that might have, or, you know, an alternative billing process that would incorporate the AMI data and its ability to implement a budget, you know, water budgets for households? Is that
so?
Down,
yeah, I mean,
downstream?
Downstream, definitely. It would be probably 2023 when we look at our next rate iteration, that we begin to look at the rate structure again and see what would be most advantageous for our customers. Because that also gives us an opportunity. We roll AMI out now, and it actually gives us an opportunity to see how our customers are using that information, how they're accessing that information through the portal, and whether that's going to be a tool that will enable them to accept a water budget or other variable rate structure that they would monitor then kind of themselves. So this is a good opportunity for us just to see how that Water Smart portal works and how our customers interact with it. And then when we go through our next rate study, to talk about how that could translate into a different type of rate structure.
Oh, okay. You know, and I guess that opens up opportunities that I hope we have money for maybe training, you know, training workshop for the AMI for customers, interested customers or something. I know there was a lot of interest on the part of some people, especially people who had experienced drastic leaks in the past, but I think there's a greater potential for more of a benefit to customers. So I'm glad to hear that.
I think so.
Yeah. But I guess that's my main comment. I thought it was very well written and it was very clear. Thank you.
Okay, my turn then, I guess. To follow up on that, how much do we have in our water demand offset to pay for this AMI project? And are we going to be paying that off completely, or will it be over the next years to pay that off?
It'll probably be a couple of years before we pay that off. So far, we've drawn down $1 million from the capital facilities reserve to fund the AMI project. And then this year we're expecting another 580,000. So now you're at 1.5 million, almost 1.6 million out of the capital facilities reserve that will need to be paid back from the WDO program. So it'll probably take a few years to amass that.
All right. Also, I see we're using our COP funds. Does that mean we're completely exhausting the 2 COPs that we have, so that they're completely out in the field being used?
That is my hope. The 2011s have been completely utilized. It's just the 2013s that we have left, and I'm hoping that this year we go ahead and exhaust those. Yeah.
Now I know that the COP interest rate for those was relatively high compared to, say, the 1.3% we're getting from the WIFIA, the one we get from the state. Is there any way that we could use more of the state and federal loan funds and pay off some of the COPs?
Well, the state and federal loan funds could not be used to retire the COP debt.
Okay.
They can be used to retire the interim debt that's taken out specifically for that project.
Yeah. Okay.
But we are in active discussions with our financial advisors about whether there's an opportunity to restructure those 2 COP issuances into a lower rate instrument. So we're looking at some cost savings there if possible.
All right. I was looking at the page of summary expenses by department, and there's quite a large administrative and general support, 1.3 million, and I'm wondering, how is that? Why is that so big? And most of the other things are much less. What goes into that category?
That's typically what we see on the general and administrative support. So what's running in there is that's all of your insurance costs, your legal costs, your network support, all of that general overhead stuff is what rolls into that general administrative expenses.
Okay. I see that the rain and stream gauges is going way up, and groundwater management is going up hugely. And have we made efforts to send some of those costs to the MGA? Because that really is for the, the progress report on the MGA mainly, I think. So
I believe that annual groundwater report has already been transferred to the MGA.
Okay, all right. You mentioned there would be $90,000 for the water purchase from the city. I don't see how we're going to be able to do any water purchase from the city, because the only thing left in our agreement is the end of December. So, and with this drought that we're in, there may not be any water for them to give us this year at all. So it may be zero instead of 90,000. Of course, we don't have to transfer it until after December, but I think that's a good place to look for funds that are not going to get spent.
Okay, that could be, yeah.
Tell me about the risk of resilience assessment that we're having to do.
So actually, I'm going to see if it's possible for Becca and Emma to unmute Christine, because she would be the person that could best describe that program.
And I can take a shot while Christine comes up. This is Ron. So we took into account what we had spent before, kind of the high end of that because of the intermittent nature of the water purchase, and what you just mentioned, President Daniels, the agreement only goes up to the year. We do hope to enter into more dialogue with Santa Cruz if there is additional water purchase. There's also behind that, and this is where Christine can help me, I think we have about $50,000. What a lot of people don't realize, there's a lot of money budgeted just to sample and monitor the transfer itself, because it is a pilot experiment program.
Sure.
Christine, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, so we budgeted for the 2 remaining months of the contract, November and December, but that also includes a month before monitoring, the 2 months during the transfer, and then 3 months afterwards. So that's where that number comes from.
Okay. And of course, if we don't transfer anything, then I assume the cost will be zero, right?
Well, we'll probably start the pre-month of monitoring.
Okay. All right, thank you. Under the capital improvement projects, we have 3 transmission and distribution projects. St. Andrews Drive, Newton Drive, and Alta Drive. And have we looked, if we run into trouble, have we looked into whether we can defer 1 or 2 or all 3 of those?
So we have looked into those. If we ran into trouble, there are projects we could defer. Those projects, the St. Andrews Drive, Baltusrol main replacement, and then the Huntington, those are areas where we have typically seen a number of main breaks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why those have been prioritized. The Alta Drive service installation and trench paving repair is one I believe we are actually mandated to go ahead and complete by the county. So that one would be the one we'd be least likely to defer to a later year.
Okay, and I'm glad we're looking into it. And finally, under conservation supplies and services, I see it's gone up from 149 last year to 198 now. And with all this COVID stuff going on, I'm wondering, I mean, since the rebates for these things never pay for the entire project. Instead, the customer gets savings over several years for conservation. But a lot of people, I mean, they're just trying to reduce their expenses. So I think if anything, conservation will be less used this year than it was last year or previous years.
So most of that is the urban water management plan. That cost increase,
right,
is mainly due to the efforts on the urban water management plan.
And are we looking at having less conservation activities?
We're looking at, they've lowered their customer rebates by $60,000.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I think that's all I had, isn't it? Yes, I did. Okay. I thank you for a good project, and it looks pretty thorough. So thank you.
President Daniels, this is Ron. If I may say a word, and I see Dr. Jaffe does too.
I do too. Yeah.
I'll go after Dr. Jaffe, please.
Okay. We need to unmute Bruce.
I'm unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Your last question about the decrease in rebates, is that because we're not getting enough, we're not getting as many applications for the rebates, or has there been a change in policy?
No, it's my speculation that people are probably not going to be doing as much rebate activity as they have in the past because they're trying to save money versus not spend it on new things like conservation.
And they have seen those projects slow a little bit. The rebates have not been taken advantage of as much as they were in the past.
Yeah. Okay. Tom?
That was it.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I mean, we are still negotiating with the city to work on a new agreement for water transfers after December, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
But the key there is, will they give us the $300 an acre, or will it be $4,000 or $5,000 an acre foot?
No, they can't. I know. I understand.
I know. So $90,000 is not going to buy much with the new price.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of useless.
Good point.
In fact, it's as they all have said over the years, it'll be probably more expensive than pure water.
Yeah.
In terms of acre foot. So we'll have to think about whether we want to spend that money on that water or spend it on pure water. The project. Anyone else have any comments or questions?
Well, I had one more. I just have a question. I didn't see it when I was looking through the looking through the budget earlier, today and yesterday, but I was just wondering, what was the status of the fish sampling? Has that gone into a new agreement with somebody else or with the other members of our basin?
So let me, I think Emma is best to address that, I believe. Is
Okay.
that correct, Emma?
Yes, can you hear me? I just got off mute.
Yep. you're on.
Yes.
So what we've included in the draft budget this year assumes the same sampling that you approved in August of 2019. So that was the full sampling of Socal Creek's, Aptos Creek and Valencia Creek and the lagoon. So it's approximately 15,700 for the full sampling. And the other agencies are still working out their budgets and determining what they can contribute to the program.
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't see it, and I wanted to. Well, I just was asking the question, so I'm glad. Thank you very much for the answer.
Yeah, it falls into one of the O&M line items. I can provide that later.
Okay. All righty.
President Daniels, this is Ron. I just wanted to, again, thank Leslie and Ryan Kennedy, because it's to have such rock solid financial professionals just takes such a burden off the whole organization. And I'll note that Leslie and team have posted her presentation. It was online before we went up, in case anybody wants to see it now. The survey and results and the financial PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, it's excellent work. And
Yes.
we can all sleep better tonight and future nights because of that great work.
No, I really think the degree of confidence that we have in our financial group is high, and I really appreciate your continued good work year after year. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
In fact, I think it's amazing they're able to do this at all, given all the things that are happening crazy in the world.
Yeah.
To come up with this good of a plan is really impressive. Well, there's a possible board action is provide staff direction. Anyone want to direct anything?
Nope, I'm good.
No, I think it's carry on. It looks very good to me.
Yep. Okay, so I think we're done with that. The next item on our list is a closed session item, number 7.1, I think it is.
Consent agenda.
Oh, right. You're right. Okay, so let's go back and deal with those. So I think it was 5, 6, and 7.
Yeah, and 12.
Yeah, and 12. Okay, number 5, go there. That is the March warrant.
That was requested.
4.5.
Yes.
By Becky.
Yeah. So she gets 2 minutes. Becky?
Ms. Steinbruner, you're now unmuted.
Hi, this is Becky Steinbruner. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I always like looking through the warrants because that's where the money's going. I have a question on page 39 and 40, the payments to Monterey Bay Labs for the pre-1914 water transfers. There looks like there's a duplication of a charge for $2,227.50. I find it curious that there's anything happening at all because the water transfers got shut down the end of January and to my understanding have not come back up since. So I see those charges, and I also see charges for Miles Farmer to do a bunch of sampling for $2,800. And I also see the payment for the water itself at $1,947. So I would like staff to look into what could be a duplication in payment to the labs, and that was, it's listed 3 times, but the duplication appears to be on March 27th. I also want to point out that there seems to be a lot of charges for the DBIA conference that, to my understanding, was canceled, but those look like they got paid out. I hope you get reimbursed for them. I also see that there is this over $1 million payment on debt for the 2011 Certificate of Participation. My understanding that that was for the Quail Run Tank, and I'm hearing now that the district needs to take out another large amount of debt to complete that project. So I'm a little confused about what the purpose of the 2011 and 2013 participations of debt were about. I also want to point out the large amount of money that your district.
Becky, your time's up. Okay.
On that item, anyway.
Right. Let's see. Well, I think we need to approve this.
I'll move payment of warrants.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. Roll call, please.
Director LaHue,
Yes.
Vice President Lather,
Yes.
Director Jaffe,
Yes.
Director Christensen,
Yes.
and President Daniels.
Yeah. Now we move to item 4.6, which is the Water District System Production Paragraph and so forth. We need to unmute her again. Becky?
Ms. Steinbrenner, you're now unmuted.
Thank you. This is Becky Steinbrenner. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to point out in the production graph on page 59 for the Prisma that the figures have not been updated for April. And so I'm curious, I see the big jump in March, and I'm curious if staff has any idea, without having this bar graph updated, what the customer usage has looked like for the month of April during the shelter in place. I also want to point out on page 61 that the data has not been updated. It only shows through December of 2019. So I'm hopeful that staff will update that for us, because I find that very interesting to look at the production and the weather index, especially since we've had a warm, dry winter. And finally, on page 62, I want to just draw to your attention and to the public listening that the average annual percent production change has gone down from 2013 for March 2020 has gone down by 23%. That's impressive, even though the per capita during the month of March 2020, per capita usage was 53 gallons per person per day. So I would appreciate some answers to these questions that I've brought forth, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. Well, I know all those percentages are relative to the dates in 2013. So it's quite some number of years ago. So in fact, we've been below those 2013 values, for what, 5-6 years now?
Yes.
Okay.
I had sort of a nerdy issue. On this first slide on page 58,
yep.
I would ask that 2020 be the same color as on all the other slides, because
I noticed that too.
I had a hard time for some reason
comparing
them out and visualizing it, because that color is so close to these other colors. Actually, on the screen, it doesn't look so much like that here, but.
I just have a comment about, I've made the mistake before that Becky's making of zeroing in on one or the other aquifers and trying to draw trends from that. And because we can redistribute pumping to some extent, that can be very misleading. And if you look at the system-wide production I think that's more more representative and shows that March, where most of March was shelter.
I agree with you. I think our staff deliberately sometimes pumps out of one aquifer instead of the other, and then next month they may switch back again. So looking at a particular aquifer doesn't tell a whole lot compared to the entire system. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, and you also have to keep in mind where March was. You know, we had absolute bone dry February, and then March was it was relatively wet compared to February, and then it dried out again. So next meeting probably will have some data on April, but the 23% is actually doesn't seem remarkable to me, especially given what happened in March, because a lot of what we would call excess water use would be the outdoor watering again, and of course that wasn't necessary in March. So either, yeah, you can read I find it really interesting to look at the production reports, but I'm wary of reading too much into it at any given point.
Right.
Good point.
And by the way, we are currently 6 inches less than normal, and we're currently about 30 inches. So that would be normal, and we're 6 inches less than that. So we're definitely going to end out the year as this being quite a dry year.
Yeah.
President, this is Ron. I'll make a quick comment. You know, in the service industry that we're in, water, you know, it's paramount that we don't get caught up in short-term anomalies and look at long-term trends. And page 62 really speaks to that, where you can see where we bottomed out in 2015, and you can see a slow trend upward in water consumption. So I think looking at the longer-term trends and thinking with that mindset serves us best and the aquifer customers.
Okay, if that's all, I will go on to the next item. Item 4. The item we've been talking about is informational only.
Yeah.
We're going to 4.7, the management update, and we're going to have a second comment on it.
Ms. Steinbruner, you're now unmuted.
Thank you. This is Becky Steinbruner. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I really want to thank you for the landscape plan that you had Joni Janecki do for the Granite Way site. I think those are beautiful plants, and it will really make a big difference for those in the area. So thank you very much for doing that, and I'll look forward to seeing that installed and maintained. And that design is on page 68. On page 69, there's the discussion about the Quail Run Tank and how it's being deferred. This has been on your books for a long time. And again, I'm seeing that you've borrowed money to do this, and you're going to borrow more money. And I'm just really curious why this project has been continually put on hold. I also want to comment on page 70, the West Annex landscape plan has been put on hold. And I'm curious why you are not choosing to put the Pure Water Socal project construction trailer, which I see in the warrants you've already bought the permit for from the county, and you approved last meeting as negative impact for a project. Why you're putting it over where you're planning to put it, very visible to the public, and not over on the West Annex property that would be less obtrusive to the public and also more in keeping with the purpose of what you said that property purchase was for. I want to point out finally that the discussion of the rate assistance really did not happen in your budget, and I'll look forward to hearing that. And I think I'm hearing I'm out of time. Am I?
Not yet.
I will have one request before you mute me. I did request from Ms. Olin that I be able to speak on item 4.0, the consent agenda in general. And so if I may, I would like to request to speak on item 4.0 4.10, I was going to speak on that. I didn't want to pull it, but I did want to speak on it and put that as item 4.0. May I speak on 4.12 when that time comes?
Well, you can speak on now. We're not doing anything with it. But yeah, you speak on.
Well, but it's been pulled, so.
No.
4.12?
No, it hasn't.
Oh, 4.12. Okay, yes.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So I had a question on this item. Just on page 71, or at the bottom of 70 and the top of 71 is just the O'Neill well. Ammonia mitigation and Corona Environmental has been working on that plan. And it said staff's preparing to move forward with modifying disinfection dosing procedures. And I just was wondering if we were going to get kind of a report on what they had found and what Corona had found and where we were with that.
Becca, if you can unmute Taj and Christine, I think Taj may be best to chime in on this one.
Taj.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so the report, they analyzed kind of the previous work that we did and kind of concluded a similar approach that we had taken for hypochlorite. And there's not, it's a very brief report. In conclusion, they wanted us to minimize the age of the hypochlorite. When you reduce the concentration of it from 12.5 to 6.5, or yeah, to 6.25, you also can possibly have more success, and then minimizing the temperature. So if the board would like, we can bring that as an informational item, but that in summary, okay, we can schedule that.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be long. Just I'd like to see it. Thanks.
Okay.
All right. Anything else on this one? I believe this is informational only, so there's no need for a vote. So we now move to item 4.12, the district's What's on Tap newsletter. And let's hear from Becky first.
Excuse me, I think I saw Dr. Jaffe's hand raised. I didn't know if it was on the previous item, but he's unmuted.
Say that, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to think there was an item about Kathy Hart's mom making face masks. I just wanted to give my thanks.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, 4.12. Becky?
Ms. Steinbruner, you're now unmuted.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? This is Becky Steinbruner.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And thank you for letting me speak on this. I had wanted to do that. So I have a question about something I read in the What's on Tap, and that is about the, first of all, I really appreciate your good level of education of the public, and that bears witness in your efforts in the survey that you heard about earlier. But in terms of explaining sustainability, there was something that caught my eye. It said, our hydrologists have told us that 5.99 units per day per household would be a sustainable level. That's on page 114. Is that true? 5.99 units per day per household? That doesn't seem quite right. And I wonder if you can explain that a bit. Thank you.
I can take that. I believe that is a error. We'll correct it. To be per month.
What? Yeah, per month. 6 units per month, right. Okay.
That's good.
I think.
And I had some minor things, correct?
Me too. Go, Bruce, and then I have a few things too.
Correct. I'll do that.
You want to go first, Tom?
No, you go.
Yeah, it's just on page, let me get there. Actually working with two computers. Okay, it would be on page 113,
Okay, that's the front page.
158, on getting to know the district.
Mm-hmm.
in the where does your water come from? Third line above the bottom. It leads in with the water in our area comes from rainfall that percolates under the ground and eventually becomes groundwater. I think it's not necessary to include and eventually becomes groundwater. To me, as soon as it percolates, it is groundwater. And then something that might be misleading, and maybe it's just me, on that same page up higher when your drinking water is safe, and it says the water from your tap is safe from coronavirus, COVID-19. The groundwater is treated and regularly tested to ensure that it meets all the stringent state and federal drinking water requirements. And those two sentences alone are certainly, in my opinion, true, but we haven't done any tests for coronavirus in our water. They're not necessary, but I was thinking, although we do tests for other things, perhaps just leaving and regularly tested out of that sentence would be less misleading to somebody who reads it like I did.
Yeah. Because in fact, I don't believe that the scientists have decided on, I think they're even having trouble with the test for humans, but tests for water, I haven't heard anything about.
Right. So just
No, they
standard.
have found a way to sample. I just heard about it today. I read about it in sewage. They've identified a way to look at population occurrence of COVID-19 through checking the sewage treatment plants. So they have figured out a way. They can sample for that. I don't know whether we should bother doing that for our own testing in this groundwater, but because there's no source right now. But
Right.
they do know how to do that. They are developing methods to do that thing.
But my point is just saying the groundwater is treated to ensure that it meets all the stringent state and federal drinking water requirements.
That's good enough. That's good enough.
But that is true, and it includes eliminating pathogens, which
you
don't test for every pathogen. You have a process.
Right.
Yep.
That's all I had.
Okay.
Well, I have a couple things.
Go ahead, Tom.
So in getting to know the district, like on the front page, when we start to talk about our source, I don't know if there's any way to just, I know that on the second page we explain seawater intrusion, but just somehow at the very beginning when people start reading, understanding that seawater intrusion is a big problem here, that's all. I just want to make sure that gets through.
And definitely the first page is the one that everyone who's going to read it will read.
And so I just felt like somehow seawater intrusion should be on that first page as part of our, because it's our biggest problem. And so, and then
I would agree with that.
Nowhere in the description of overdrafts on the second page, seawater intrusion and sustainability, they just mention projects, but nobody really even explains Pure Water Socal. And I know maybe you're thinking we explained it in previous issues, but I still think it's another opportunity to educate about that process. We got a whole page of stuff and nothing specifically on it. And then finally, let's see, I think that's finally, maybe not, third page. New water use monitoring tool for customers coming this fall. And just like, want to really encourage somewhere in there to say that this is going to be a way to save water, help protect from seawater intrusion, and also save money for people. And then I also wondered if there was any kind of little visual interface of what it's going to look like that you could put on that page so people could kind of get an idea, or maybe that's not available yet. And that is, no, wait, there's one more under question corner where special district, I think it might not hurt to say that it is a not-for-profit local agency, just clarifying that, because I think people just aren't always clear on that.
Good idea.
That's
That's a
all.
good idea. That's good.
I think on page 114, rather than talking about the community water plan, there's a whole paragraph about it, I would talk about pure water Soquel, because that's the more critical, important thing to get people comfortable with.
Well, even as part of the community water plan, it should at least be mentioned specifically there, I think.
Well, I was just saying, just to use the same amount of space, I would rather have it talk about pure water than talk about the community water plan. Now, if you can do both, that's great. But if you can only do one, I would talk about pure water.
Well, and pure water Soquel is in the graphic.
Yep.
In the graph, but not explained.
That's described, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So we done with this one?
Yeah.
Okay. So that carries us to the end of that. And I think now we go to, I don't think we have to approve this. No, this is informational feedback. So we now go to a closed session. So each of you should log out of your session, and you should have gotten something from Emma about where we're going to do the closed session.
Great. Okay. See you
Okay.
there.
And what about the comment? Is there a
So,
comment on this?
the second part of the closed session was canceled.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so we'll adjourn to closed session, and then Becca will stay on the line and report out after closed session is over, whatever direction the board provides.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. See you all over there.
Okay.
Closed session ended at 9:03 p.m. and there's no reportable action. Thank you.